My name is Nadine, and I'm 65 years old. After my husband left us, I worked 3 jobs to put my only son Thomas through medical school. For decades, I sacrificed everything for his future. But on his graduation day, he introduced another woman as his mother. "This is my mom, the woman responsible for who I am today," he said proudly to his friends. The pain cut deeper than any knife could, but I refused to disappear silently into the background. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button if you've ever felt invisible to someone you loved. Trust me, what I did next changed everything. I grew up in a small town called Pinewood in Minnesota where everyone knew everyone's business and dreams rarely extended beyond the county line. My parents were hardworking people who valued practicality over ambition. When I married James at 19, they thought I'd made a sensible choice. He had a steady job at the local factory and came from a respectable family. James was charming and full of big ideas, though not always the follow-through to match. In the beginning, our life together was simple but happy. We rented a modest 2-bedroom house on Maple Street, and I worked part-time at the local diner while taking community college classes. When I found out I was pregnant at 22, it wasn't exactly planned, but I was overjoyed. I still remember the moment I told James, expecting him to share my excitement. He smiled, hugged me, but there was something reserved in his eyes that I chose to ignore. "A son," he said when Thomas was born. "A son can make something of himself." He held our baby with pride, but as the weeks passed, I noticed how quickly he handed Thomas back whenever he cried or needed changing. The first 3 years weren't bad. James would play with Thomas when he was clean-fed and happy. He'd build block towers with him and cheer when Thomas knocked them down. But the day-to-day parenting, that fell to me. When Thomas turned 4, things at the factory changed. New management came in, cutting hours and benefits. James's paychecks shrank, and so did his interest in family life. He started coming home later, smelling of beer and frustration. "I'm not made for this small-town life, Nadine," he'd say, staring out our kitchen window like a man trapped. "There's more out there for a guy like me." I took on a second job stocking shelves at the grocery store after my diner shift. The extra money helped, but it meant less time with Thomas. I'd come home exhausted to find James watching TV. Thomas asleep on the couch beside him, often still in his day clothes, unfed. "He's fine, Nadine," James would say when I expressed concern. "Stop babying him." By the time Thomas turned 6, James's absences became longer and more frequent. He'd disappear for days, claiming he was looking for better work in neighboring towns. Then came the night I found the stack of unpaid bills he'd hidden beneath the mattress. 3 months of mortgage payments, overdue utility notices, credit card statements with balances I never knew existed. When I confronted him, he packed a bag. "This family thing," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "It's just not working out for me." And just like that, he was gone. No goodbye to Thomas, no forwarding address, just the mountain of debt and a 6-year-old boy who kept asking when Daddy was coming home. The next morning, I sat Thomas down at our kitchen table. His little legs dangled from the chair, his favorite dinosaur pajamas, already too small. "It's just going to be you and me for a while, buddy," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Did Daddy leave because I was bad?" Thomas asked, his brown eyes wide with confusion. "No, honey. Sometimes grown-ups make choices that have nothing to do with the people they leave behind. Your daddy loves you, but he wasn't ready to be a father." It was more kindness than James deserved, but Thomas didn't need to carry the weight of his father's failings. That week, I picked up a 3rd job cleaning offices at night. I sold our secondhand car and started taking the bus. We moved from our house to a 1-bedroom apartment above the laundromat on 5th Street. Thomas slept in the bedroom. I took the pull-out couch. The first year was the hardest. Juggling 3 jobs while caring for a 6-year-old left little room for sleep or self-care. Most nights, I'd crawl onto that lumpy couch around midnight, set my alarm for 4:30 a.m., and fall into a dreamless exhaustion. But Thomas was worth every sacrifice. He was a bright, curious child who devoured books and asked questions that sometimes left me scrambling for answers. His first-grade teacher, Mrs. Patterson, pulled me aside during a parent-teacher conference. "Thomas has remarkable potential," she said. "His reading level is already at 3rd grade. Have you considered the gifted program? Pride swelled in my chest momentarily, displacing the constant worry about money. That night, I splurged on ice cream to celebrate watching Thomas's face light up with chocolate-smeared delight. "Mom, when I grow up, I want to be a doctor," he announced, scraping his spoon around the empty bowl. "A doctor, that's a big goal," I said, my mind immediately calculating the impossible cost of medical school. "Mrs. Patterson says I'm smart enough," he replied with the beautiful confidence of childhood. "And I want to help people who are sick." Looking at my son's earnest face, I made a silent promise. Whatever it took, however many jobs I needed to work, Thomas would have the opportunities I never did. His father might have abandoned us, but I would be the constant in Thomas's life, the foundation he could build his dreams upon. What I didn't realize then was how high the cost would eventually become, not just financially, but in ways that would cut to the very core of who I was as a mother. The next few years were a delicate balancing act between working enough to support us and being present for Thomas. I established a routine that maximized the time we had together. Mornings were sacred. I'd wake up early to prepare a proper breakfast, pack his lunch, and walk him to school before heading to my first job at the diner. My waitressing shift ran from 7:30 a.m. to 2:30 p.m., which meant I could pick Thomas up from school most days. Those walks home became our special time. Thomas would chatter about what he'd learned, the friends he'd made, the books he was reading. I drank in every word, storing them like treasures for the long nights ahead. After a quick dinner I'd prepared the night before, I'd help Thomas with homework before dropping him at Mrs. Geller's apartment down the hall. A retired teacher, she'd agreed to watch him for a reduced rate while I worked my second and third jobs, retail at the mall from 4 to 9, then office cleaning from 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. Mrs. Geller would put Thomas to bed in our apartment, and I'd come home in the early morning hours to find him sleeping peacefully. Sometimes I'd just sit beside his bed for a few minutes, watching his chest rise and fall, gathering strength from his presence before collapsing onto my couch bed for a few hours of sleep. By the time Thomas entered middle school, the strain began to show. Not financially, I'd managed to stabilize our situation, even saving a small amount each month for his college fund, but in our relationship. As Thomas grew older, he became more aware of what we lacked compared to his peers. "Why can't we get a bigger apartment?" he asked one day after a classmate's birthday party. "Jacob has his own room and a game room." "Jacob's parents probably don't have to work 3 jobs," I replied, trying to keep my tone light. "That's not my fault." Thomas muttered the words, hitting me like a physical blow. The academic achievements continued to pile up: honor roll, science fair victories, advanced placement classes. But something was changing in Thomas. The sweet boy who used to throw his arms around me when I picked him up from school now walked several steps ahead, hands shoved in his pockets. When Thomas turned 14, he was accepted into Westlake Academy, a prestigious high school known for sending students to Ivy League universities. The scholarship covered most of the tuition, but the required supplies, appropriate clothing, and activity fees stretched my budget to the breaking point. "You don't have to come to the parent orientation," Thomas said when I mentioned requesting time off from the diner. "It's not mandatory." "But I want to be there, Thomas. This is an important step for you." He shrugged, not meeting my eyes. "It's going to be all corporate parents in fancy clothes. You'll be coming straight from your shift. You'll stand out." I went anyway, sitting in the back row in my freshly washed uniform, trying to ignore the curious glances from parents in tailored suits and designer dresses. Thomas sat with the other students, not acknowledging me once during the 2-hour presentation. It was at Westlake that Thomas met Daniel Hamilton, son of Richard and Diana Hamilton. The Hamiltons owned half the real estate in our county and lived in a mansion on the hill overlooking the town. Daniel invited Thomas to study at his house one weekend, and my son returned transformed. They have a private library, Mom, with actual first editions, and Mrs. Hamilton used to work in hospital administration. She knows all about pre-med programs. Diana Hamilton began taking a special interest in Thomas. She volunteered at the school, chairing the academic council that oversaw the gifted program. According to Thomas, she often singled him out for praise, introducing him to connections who might be useful for his medical school aspirations. "Mrs. Hamilton says with my grades I could get a scholarship to Princeton," Thomas announced over a dinner of reheated spaghetti in our tiny kitchenette. "She's going to help me with the application process when the time comes." That's wonderful, Thomas," I managed, swallowing the complicated mix of gratitude and unease rising in my throat. As Thomas's junior year progressed, he spent more and more time at the Hamilton estate. Diana drove an Audi SUV and started picking Thomas up from school, claiming it was on her way, though we all knew it wasn't. She invited him for dinners, weekend stays, even a spring break trip to visit colleges on the East Coast, an opportunity I couldn't have provided. "I can pay for part of the trip," I offered, holding out $300 I'd saved from extra holiday shifts. Thomas looked embarrassed. "Mrs. Hamilton already covered everything, Mom. She said it's an investment in my future." I pushed the money into his hand anyway. "Then use this for spending money. I want to contribute something." He took it reluctantly, and I later discovered he left the bills on his dresser when he packed for the trip. The summer before Thomas's senior year, I barely saw him. He worked as a research assistant at the hospital where Diana had connections and spent weekends at academic camps or the Hamiltons' lake house. When he was home, he was distant, constantly texting or studying in his room. One night, I knocked on his door with a plate of his favorite cookies, chocolate chip with extra walnuts. "I thought you might want a study snack," I said. Thomas barely looked up from his laptop. "Mrs. Hamilton says refined sugar interferes with cognitive function during intensive study periods." I set the plate down anyway. "One cookie won't hurt. I made them special for you." "I'm really busy, Mom." He sighed, the exasperation clear in his voice. I left the room feeling like a stranger in my own home. The plate of cookies remained untouched until morning. When college acceptance letters began arriving, Thomas brought them straight to the Hamiltons before showing me. Princeton offered a substantial scholarship, but not a full ride. The gap would still be tens of thousands of dollars per year. "I'll figure it out," I promised Thomas. "We might need to take out some loans, but we'll make it work." Thomas shifted uncomfortably. "Actually, Mrs. Hamilton has offered to help with the expenses. She and Mr. Hamilton have an educational fund they set up for Daniel, but he's going into the family business instead of college." The implication was clear. They were redirecting their son's college fund to Thomas. My son was becoming their project, their achievement. I smiled through gritted teeth. That's very generous of them. What Thomas didn't know was that I'd already refinanced our apartment, taken out a personal loan, and picked up extra weekend shifts to contribute to his education. I wasn't about to let the Hamiltons, with their casual wealth and calculated generosity, be the only ones investing in my son's future. But with every passing day, it became clearer that Thomas was slipping away from me. He was gravitating toward the life the Hamiltons represented, privileged connections, ease, and viewing the life I'd provided with growing disdain. The night before he left for Princeton, I made his favorite meal, meatloaf with mashed potatoes and green beans. We sat at our small table, the silence between us punctuated only by the scrape of forks against plates. "I'm proud of you, Thomas," I said finally. "So proud of everything you've accomplished." He nodded, pushing food around his plate. "I know, Mom. I want you to know that everything I've done, every job, every sacrifice was because I believe in you." "Can we not do this right now?" Thomas sighed. "Mrs. Hamilton is picking me up early tomorrow for the airport. I should finish packing." He stood up, leaving his half-eaten dinner on the table. "Thomas," I called as he turned toward his room. "I love you." He paused briefly in the doorway. "Yeah, you too." It wasn't until after he left the next morning, without waking me to say goodbye, that I found the check he'd left on the counter. $5,000 from the Hamiltons, with a note in Diana's elegant handwriting, a contribution toward Thomas's expenses. We're all so proud of him. I stared at the check for a long time, tears blurring my vision. They had given me money like I was a service provider, not the woman who had raised Thomas, who had shaped him into the person they now claimed to be proud of. But I swallowed my pride and deposited the check. Thomas's education came first, it always had. What I didn't realize then was that this was just the beginning of being erased from my own son's life. Thomas's calls during that first semester at Princeton were infrequent and brief. When I asked about his classes, his friends, his dormitory, he'd give one-word answers before finding reasons to end the conversation. "I've got study group in 5 minutes, Mom. The dining hall closes soon, I should go. Daniel's calling on the other line, can I call you back?" He rarely did. Meanwhile, my Facebook feed filled with photos posted by Diana Hamilton Thomas at campus events. Thomas at the Hamiltons' vacation home during long weekends, Thomas sitting at their Thanksgiving table while I worked a double shift at the diner to afford the tuition payment due in January. When Christmas break approached, I saved for months to take time off work. I deep cleaned our apartment, bought ingredients for all Thomas's favorite meals, and even splurged on a small tree with lights, something we hadn't been able to afford in years. 3 days before his scheduled return, Thomas called. "Mom, there's been a change of plans," he said, his voice careful. "The Hamiltons invited me to spend Christmas at their ski lodge in Vermont. Daniel's going to be there and some other students from Princeton." My heart sank. "But you were coming home. I've taken the time off work." A pause. "I know, and I'm sorry. But this is a really good opportunity to network with some of Daniel's family friends. His uncle is on the board at Johns Hopkins Medical School." I wanted to protest to remind him that Christmas was about family, the family that had been there for him his entire life. But the thought of Thomas's medical school aspirations made me hesitate. "I understand," I said finally, though I didn't. Not really. "I'll try to come by after New Year's before heading back to school," he offered. He didn't. As his freshman year continued, Thomas's communication became almost exclusively focused on finances. He needed money for textbooks, for a laptop upgrade, for summer housing so he could take additional courses. Each time I'd work extra shifts, skip meals, postpone bill payments, whatever it took to send him what he needed. What I didn't know until much later was that the Hamiltons were also sending money far more substantial amounts than I could manage. Thomas had simply learned to double dip, knowing neither party would refuse him. By sophomore year, Thomas had secured a prestigious internship at a research hospital in Boston for the summer. I suggested he stay with my cousin who lived in the suburbs to save on rent. "Already taken care of," Thomas replied. "The Hamiltons rented an apartment near the hospital for me." "That must be expensive," I said. "I could help with—" "Mom," Thomas interrupted. "They can afford it. It's not a big deal to them." The unspoken comparison hung between us. It would be a very big deal for me. When Thomas's social media profile was updated a few months later, I noticed something that made my stomach clench. In his personal information under hometown, he had listed Greenwich, Connecticut, where the Hamiltons had their primary residence, not our small Minnesota town where he'd grown up. It was during his junior year that I discovered Thomas had spent spring break in Europe with the Hamiltons, through photos Diana posted online. He hadn't mentioned the trip to me at all. When I called to ask about it, he sounded irritated. "It was a last-minute thing," he said. "Diana thought it would be good for me to see some of the historical medical facilities in London and Paris." Diana, not Mrs. Hamilton anymore. "I would have liked to know you were leaving the country," I said, trying to keep the hurt from my voice. "I'm 21, Mom. I don't need permission." "It's not about permission, Thomas. It's about communication. I worry about you." He sighed, that familiar sound of exasperation. "You don't need to worry. I'm doing great. My GPA is perfect. My MCAT scores are in the top percentile, and I've got strong recommendations for medical school." "That's wonderful, honey. I'm so proud. I've got to go. We'll talk later." We didn't. Not for another 3 months. When Thomas was accepted to Harvard Medical School, I found out through a congratulatory post Diana made on social media. "So proud of our brilliant Thomas Harvard Medical Bound, #ProudMom." The hashtag felt like a slap across my face. I called Thomas immediately. "Harvard Medical School," I said when he answered. "Thomas, that's incredible news. Why didn't you tell me—" A beat of silence. "I was going to. Things have been hectic with finals and graduation coming up. But you told the Hamiltons." "They were with me when I got the email," he said defensively. "I would have loved to share that moment with you," I said, my voice small. "Look, I need to discuss something important," Thomas said, changing the subject. "Harvard's tuition is substantial even with the partial scholarship I received." "Of course. Money again." "I'll help however I can," I said automatically, even as I wondered how I could possibly contribute to Harvard-level expenses. "The Hamiltons have offered to cover the majority," Thomas continued, "but there will still be living expenses, books, equipment. Medical school is expensive." "I understand. I can send—" "I've calculated it would be about $2,000 a month for 4 years," Thomas interrupted. I nearly dropped the phone. $2,000 a month was more than my rent and utilities combined. Thomas, I can't possibly. Mom, this is Harvard Medical School we're talking about. This is everything I've been working toward. The guilt was immediate and overwhelming. I'll find a way, I promised, though I had no idea how. That night, I applied for a second mortgage on my small apartment, which I'd finally managed to purchase after years of saving. I reached out to a financial advisor who helped me liquidate the modest retirement account I'd started in my 40s. I contacted the hospital where I'd been cleaning offices and asked for additional shifts in their radiology department, which paid slightly better due to the technical equipment. At 61 years old, I was essentially starting over, financially erasing 2 decades of careful saving. But this was Thomas's dream, and I'd promised to support it whatever the cost. What I didn't know was that Thomas had already decided the cost would include erasing me from his narrative altogether. The first hint came when I received his graduation invitation from Princeton. The envelope contained a formal invitation, but no personal note. When I called to discuss travel arrangements, Thomas was vague. "It's going to be really busy that weekend," he said. "There are a lot of events." "I've taken 3 days off work," I told him. "I want to be there for everything." "That's not necessary. The main ceremony is Sunday at 10 a.m. "I'll be there Saturday morning," I insisted. "Maybe we can have dinner together before any evening events." A pause. "I'll have to see what's on the schedule. The Hamiltons have rented a house for the weekend, and there are some department gatherings." "I see." I swallowed hard. "Well, I'll be there. I wouldn't miss your graduation for anything." I spent the next month preparing, picking up extra shifts to afford a decent hotel room near campus, finding a modest but appropriate dress on sale, getting my first professional haircut in years. This was Thomas's moment, but it was also the culmination of every sacrifice I'd made. I wanted to look like someone he could be proud to introduce to his professors and friends. The day before graduation, I took a red-eye flight to New Jersey after finishing my evening shift. I arrived at the small hotel near Princeton's campus, exhausted but excited. Thomas knew I was coming, though he hadn't offered to meet me at the airport or help with arrangements. When I called his cell phone, after checking in, it went straight to voicemail. "Hi, Thomas. It's Mom. I'm here in Princeton now. Just wanted to let you know I arrived safely. Looking forward to seeing you tomorrow at the ceremony, if not before. Love you." He didn't call back. That night, I carefully laid out my new dress, a simple blue sheath that the saleswoman had assured me was appropriate for a graduation, and the small pearl earrings I'd splurged on. In the morning, I took extra time with my makeup, trying to cover the dark circles from years of night shifts. I arrived at the graduation venue early, finding a seat with a good view of the stage where graduates would receive their diplomas. Around me, other families chatted excitedly, taking photos and adjusting bouquets of flowers. I hadn't been able to afford flowers, but I had a card with all my love and the promise of a special dinner to celebrate. As the ceremony began, I craned my neck to spot Thomas among the sea of black caps and gowns. When his name was called, Thomas James Henderson, summa cum laude, my eyes filled with tears of pride. He walked across that stage with confidence, shaking the dean's hand firmly, his future bright and limitless. After the ceremony, graduates dispersed to find their families amid the crowd. I stood on tiptoe, scanning for Thomas's tall figure. That's when I saw him surrounded by a group of young people in caps and gowns, and beside him, the unmistakable figures of Diana and Richard Hamilton. I started making my way toward them, my heart pounding with anticipation. It had been almost a year since I'd seen Thomas in person. As I got closer, I could hear Diana's voice, clear and refined. "We're so proud of you, darling. 4 years gone by in a flash." I was about 15 feet away when one of Thomas's friends, a young woman with a camera, gestured toward the Hamiltons. "Thomas, I need a picture of you with your parents." Time seemed to slow as I watched my son put his arm around Diana Hamilton's shoulders. "This is my mom," he said clearly, proudly, "the woman responsible for who I am today." Diana beamed, patting his cheek affectionately, while Richard stood tall and proud on Thomas's other side. In that moment, it felt like the ground had disappeared beneath my feet. 22 years of motherhood, of night shifts and missed meals and worn-out shoes erased with a single sentence. I must have made a sound because Thomas looked up, then his eyes meeting mine over the heads of his friends. Something flickered across his face. Recognition alarm, perhaps even shame, but it was quickly replaced with a tight smile. "Nadine," he said, stepping away from the Hamiltons. "You made it. Not, 'Mom,' not, 'I'm glad you're here,' just 'Nadine,' like I was a distant acquaintance." "Of course I made it," I replied, my voice somehow steady despite the earthquake happening inside me. I wouldn't miss my son's graduation. An uncomfortable silence fell over the group. Diana Hamilton's smile remained fixed, but her eyes had turned cold. "Everyone," Thomas finally said, his tone overly bright. "This is Nadine. She's an old family friend from back home." An old family friend. The words hit me like physical blows, each one a separate injury. Old, family, friend. Not his mother, not the woman who had raised him alone, not the person who had worked 3 jobs for 2 decades to put him through school. Just an old family friend from back home. In that moment, as I stood there in my carefully chosen dress with my styled hair and my mother's heartbreaking, I knew I had a choice. I could smile and nod and accept this public denial of our relationship. I could fade into the background like Thomas clearly wanted me to. I could preserve his new narrative at the expense of my own existence. Or I could stand up for the truth of who we were to each other. I could refuse to be erased. As Thomas attempted to usher me away from his real family and his impressed friends, I felt something shift inside me. A lifetime of putting Thomas first, of sacrificing my needs for his suddenly reordered itself. I straightened my shoulders and took a deep breath. I would not disappear silently. Not today. Not after everything. The circle of graduates and their families fell silent as I took a deliberate step forward. Diana Hamilton's perfectly made-up face watched me with barely concealed disdain, while Thomas's expression cycled rapidly between embarrassment and alarm. "An old family friend," I repeated, my voice steady despite the trembling in my hands. "Is that how you see me now, Thomas?" Thomas glanced nervously at his friends, then back to the Hamiltons. "Mom, this isn't the time or place. Mom." One of his friends looked confused. "I thought—" She gestured toward Diana. "Yes," I said, meeting the young woman's eyes. "I am Thomas's mother. I carried him for 9 months and raised him for 18 years on my own." Thomas stepped closer, his voice dropping to an urgent whisper. "Please don't make a scene. We can talk about this later in private." "When would that be, Thomas?" I asked, not lowering my voice. "After you introduce me as your family friend to everyone else, after the Hamiltons host your graduation dinner that I wasn't invited to, when exactly would we discuss how you've erased me from your life?" "Diana." Hamilton moved forward, her cashmere-clad arm sliding protectively around Thomas's shoulders. "Thomas, darling, perhaps your friend is feeling overwhelmed. Graduations can be so emotional." Her sympathetic tone was belied by the steel in her eyes. "Maybe she needs to sit down somewhere quiet." The dismissal was so blatant, so calculated, that it cut through the last of my hesitation. "I've been standing my entire life, Diana," I said calmly. "Standing through night shifts, cleaning offices after waitressing all day, standing in discount stores trying to find clothes that would fit my growing son without destroying our food budget, standing at bus stops in Minnesota winters because I couldn't afford a car while raising a child alone." Thomas's face had gone pale. "Mom, please." "I'm not ashamed of any of it," I continued. "I'm proud of every sacrifice I made for you, Thomas. What I can't understand is why you're so ashamed of me that you'd deny I'm your mother." One of Thomas's friends, a tall young man with kind eyes, looked between Thomas and the Hamiltons with growing understanding. "Dude, what's going on here?" Thomas ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture I recognized from his childhood. "It's complicated," he muttered. "Actually, it's quite simple," I said. Thomas was raised in a small apartment above a laundromat by a single mother who worked multiple jobs. That didn't fit the image he wanted to project at Princeton, so when the wealthy Hamiltons took an interest in him, he allowed them to replace me in his narrative. "That's not fair," Thomas protested, his voice rising. "They helped me when you couldn't. They introduced me to people who advanced my career. They paid for—" "We all contributed to your education, Thomas," I interrupted gently. "The difference is that for me it meant taking out a second mortgage at 61 years old. It meant cleaning hospital floors at 2 a.m. It meant sacrificing any chance of retirement. A murmur ran through the gathered students. Diana's grip on Thomas's arm tightened visibly. "I think you're exaggerating for sympathy," she said coldly. "Thomas has told us all about his childhood, about your struggles with stability." My eyebrows rose. "Struggles with stability." "Your various jobs," she clarified with a dismissive wave. "Your financial difficulties." Thomas needed consistency guidance from someone who understood the world he was entering. "And you decided that person was you, not the woman who raised him," I stated flatly. "We gave Thomas opportunities you never could." Richard Hamilton spoke up, for the first time his voice carrying the unmistakable tone of wealth and privilege. "Connections, cultural experiences, a proper home environment during college breaks." "You gave him material things," I acknowledged, "but I gave him life love and the values that made him someone worth investing in. At least I thought I had." Thomas's face flushed with anger. "That's enough. You're embarrassing me and ruining my graduation day." The words hung in the air, harsh and revealing. "I embarrass you," I repeated softly. "That's what this is really about, isn't it? Not my parenting or my sacrifices, but how I look to your friends. My department store dress and weathered hands don't fit in your new world." "You don't understand how things work here," Thomas insisted, gesturing around the ivy-covered campus. "Perception matters, connections matter." "And the truth doesn't?" I asked. A female graduate stepped forward from the group. "My mom cleaned houses to put me through Princeton," she said quietly. "I'm not embarrassed by that. I'm incredibly proud of her." Thomas flinched as if he'd been struck. "I never asked you to work 3 jobs," he said defensively. "I never asked you to sacrifice everything." "No, you didn't," I agreed. "Parents don't make sacrifices because their children ask them to. They do it because they love them unconditionally." Diana made a sound of exasperation. "This is becoming melodramatic. Thomas has exams to prepare for a medical career to focus on. He doesn't need this emotional manipulation." Something in me snapped at her words. I opened my purse and pulled out an envelope I'd brought for Thomas, a card containing my well wishes and a small gift. Instead, I extracted the contents, revealing bank statements and payment confirmations. "Manipulation," I echoed, holding up the papers. "Is it manipulation to show proof of the $20,000 I contributed to Thomas's first year at Harvard Medical School? Or the loan documents for the second mortgage I took out on my apartment to help with his living expenses?" Thomas's eyes widened. "I thought the Hamiltons were covering everything." I finished for him. "They weren't. I was still sending $2,000 every month. Money I didn't have to spare." The young man who had spoken earlier let out a low whistle. "Damn, Thomas." Diana's perfect composure finally cracked. "This is inappropriate. These private financial matters aren't for public discussion." "I agree," I said. "They should have been discussed privately between a mother and son who respect each other. Unfortunately, that option was taken from me when my son decided I was just an old family friend." Thomas's face had drained of color. For the first time, he seemed to be truly seeing me not as an embarrassment to be managed, but as the mother who had given everything for him. "I didn't know," he said, his voice small, "about the second mortgage, about the monthly payments." "There's a lot you don't know," I replied, "because somewhere along the way you decided I wasn't worth knowing anymore." A campus security guard had noticed our growing confrontation and was moving toward our group. I gathered my dignity and stepped back. "Congratulations on your graduation, Thomas," I said formally. "I wish you success in medical school and beyond." I turned to the Hamiltons, who were watching with cold, assessing eyes. "He's a remarkable young man," I told them. "But he wasn't made by money or connections. He was shaped by love and sacrifice long before you ever met him." As I walked away, Thomas called after me, his voice uncertain. "Mom, wait." I paused, but didn't turn around. "I've been waiting for years, Thomas. For acknowledgement, for appreciation, for simple respect. I'm done waiting." With those words, I continued walking, head held high through the crowd of whispering graduates and their families. Tears blurred my vision, but I refused to break down here in public where Thomas could add it to his list of ways I embarrassed him. Only when I reached the quiet of my hotel room did I allow the full weight of the day's events to crash over me. I sat on the edge of the bed, still in my carefully chosen dress, and wept for the son who had rejected me, for the sacrifices that had gone unacknowledged, and for the broken relationship I wasn't sure could ever be repaired. What I didn't realize then was that my moment of standing up for myself had set in motion a chain of events that would eventually lead to healing, not just for me, but for Thomas as well. But that journey was just beginning, and there would be more pain before any resolution could be found. That night in the hotel room, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Thomas's face, not as the polished Princeton graduate denying me, but as the little boy who used to run into my arms after school, who'd once made me a Mother's Day card with macaroni and glitter that proclaimed, "Best mom ever." When had that child disappeared? When had my son decided I wasn't good enough anymore? The flight home the next morning was a blur. I returned to my apartment, which now felt both empty and suffocating with the weight of memories. 3 days later, I was back at work, serving breakfast at the diner, stocking shelves at the store, and cleaning offices at night. The familiar rhythm of exhaustion provided a strange comfort. A week passed with no word from Thomas, then 2. I checked my phone obsessively, jumping whenever it buzzed, but it was never him. Diana Hamilton had removed me from her social media connections, cutting off even that tenuous link to my son's life. Nearly a month after graduation, I was wiping down tables at the diner when my manager called me to the phone. "It's for you, Nadine. Says he's from Princeton University." My heart leaped to my throat as I took the receiver. "Hello, Mrs. Henderson. This is Professor Alan Winters from the Department of Biology at Princeton." Not Thomas. I swallowed my disappointment. "Yes. I was Thomas's academic advisor," he explained. "I was at graduation last month and witnessed what happened." I closed my eyes briefly. "I see. Please don't misunderstand. I'm not calling to criticize. Quite the opposite. I wanted to reach out because I was moved by your courage that day." His unexpected words brought a fresh wave of emotion. "Thank you, but I'm not sure courage is the right word. Desperation, maybe." "Mrs. Henderson, I've been teaching for 30 years. I've seen countless students from humble backgrounds try to reinvent themselves at Princeton, ashamed of where they came from. What I witnessed at graduation was a mother refusing to be erased from her child's narrative. That takes tremendous courage." I leaned against the wall, grateful for its support. "Thank you for saying that. I also wanted you to know that your words had an impact. Several of Thomas's classmates have been talking about it. One young woman even started a support group for first-generation college students to connect with others who understand the sacrifices their families made." A small spark of something like pride warmed my chest. I didn't intend to start a movement. I just wanted my son to acknowledge me. Sometimes the most powerful statements are the ones that come from personal truth, Professor Winters said thoughtfully. "But I also called to tell you something else. I've been mentoring Thomas since his sophomore year, and despite what you saw at graduation, he has spoken of you many times." My breath caught. "He has?" "Yes. When discussing his motivation for pursuing medicine, he often mentioned his single mother who worked multiple jobs to support him. He described your determination as his inspiration." Tears welled in my eyes. That doesn't align with how he treated me. "People are complicated, Mrs. Henderson. I believe Thomas has been caught between gratitude for your sacrifices and embarrassment about your circumstances. It's not right, but it's human, especially for young people trying to fit into environments where privilege is the norm." I considered his words. "Do you know how he's doing now? Has he started at Harvard Medical School?" Professor Winters hesitated. "I'm not in regular contact with him post-graduation, but I did hear from a colleague that Thomas has deferred his start at Harvard for a semester. The official reason given was a research opportunity, but I understood what he wasn't saying. The real reason might be more complicated." "Yes, I thought you should know." There was a pause. "Would it be all right if I shared your contact information with some resources for parents in similar situations? There are support groups that might be helpful." An hour later, I had information about parents of first-generation college students, an organization that connected parents who were navigating the complex emotions and challenges of watching their children enter worlds they themselves had never experienced. Through this group, I met Janet, whose daughter had also distanced herself after attending an elite university, and Marcus, whose son had changed his name to sound less ethnic after getting accepted to law school. People who understood the unique pain of being both immensely proud of your child's success and deeply hurt by their apparent shame. 2 months after graduation, I received my first communication from Thomas, a brief email. Mom, I'm taking some time to think about things. I've deferred Harvard for a semester. I'm sorry for what happened at graduation. I need space right now. Please don't contact me yet. The message was short and didn't address any of the real issues between us, but it was something. He had called me Mom, not Nadine. It was a small acknowledgement of our true relationship. I respected his request for space, though it cost me dearly. Every day I fought the urge to call him to try to bridge the gap between us. Instead, I focused on myself for perhaps the first time in decades. With guidance from the parent support group, I began seeing a therapist who specialized in family estrangement, Dr. Brennan helped me understand that Thomas's rejection wasn't necessarily about me as a person, but about what I represented, a background he was trying to escape, financial struggles he wanted to leave behind. Your son is trying to reinvent himself, Dr. Brennan explained during one session. But in doing so, he's cutting off part of his identity. That's not sustainable in the long run. Will he ever come back to me? I asked the question that haunted my sleepless nights. Many do eventually, when they're more secure in themselves, when they realize that their origins are not something to be ashamed of, but integral to who they are. With this fragile hope, I continued my healing process. I joined a community center program that offered financial planning for older adults working to rebuild some of what I'd sacrificed for Thomas's education. I started a small support group at my church for single parents, sharing both the challenges and joys of raising children alone. Slowly, I began reclaiming parts of myself that had been subsumed by motherhood and survival. I took a watercolor class on Saturday mornings, something I'd always wanted to try but never had time for while raising Thomas. I reconnected with old friends I'd lost touch with during years of working multiple jobs. 4 months after graduation, I received an unexpected phone call. Mrs. Henderson, my name is Lucia Ramirez. I was in Thomas's graduating class at Princeton. I recognized the name immediately. You were there that day. You spoke about your mother cleaning houses. Yes, she confirmed. I've been thinking about you a lot since then. Your courage inspired me to start a mentorship program for first-generation college students at Princeton. We help them navigate campus culture while staying connected to their roots. That's wonderful, I said sincerely. I'm actually calling because, well, Thomas reached out to me recently. He's been going through some things, reevaluating his choices. He asked about you. My heart stuttered. What did he want to know? How you were doing? If you seemed okay when you left campus that day. She paused. I think he's struggling with guilt, but doesn't know how to approach you. Did you tell him I'm fine? I asked. I told him the truth that his actions hurt you deeply, but that you showed incredible strength. I also told him that if he wants to know how you're doing, he should ask you himself. I smiled despite the ache in my chest. Thank you for that. He's not a bad person, Mrs. Henderson, Lucia said gently. Just a confused one trying to figure out who he is. I know, I replied. I raised him after all. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived in my mailbox, not an email, but an actual handwritten letter on expensive stationery. Thomas's handwriting had changed since the last time I'd seen it, become more precise, more controlled, but I still recognized it instantly. Dear Mom, it began, and those 2 simple words brought tears to my eyes. I've started this letter 100 times over the past months. Nothing I write seems adequate to address what happened or what I've done. The simplest truth is this. I was wrong. Deeply, inexcusably wrong. When I came to Princeton, I was overwhelmed by the wealth and privilege surrounding me. Students whose parents were CEOs and senators who had never worried about money a day in their lives. I felt like an imposter waiting to be exposed as the son of a waitress from Minnesota. The Hamiltons offered me a shortcut to acceptance. With them, I could pretend to be something I wasn't, and gradually that pretense became my reality. I began to believe my own lies. What happened at graduation wasn't a sudden decision to deny you. It was the culmination of years of small betrayals, each one making the next easier. Since that day, I've been forced to confront who I've become. Several of my friends stopped speaking to me. Professor Winters called me to his office for a conversation I'll never forget, asking me if the values I'd displayed were the values I wanted to carry into my medical career. I've been meeting with a therapist at the University Counseling Center. She's helping me understand that my shame was never really about you. It was about my own insecurities, my fear of not belonging. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I want you to know that I am facing what I did and trying to become someone worthy of the sacrifices you made for me. With remorse and love, Thomas. I read the letter multiple times, tracing his words with my finger, feeling both the pain of our broken relationship and the first tentative hope for healing. There was no request for a meeting, no presumption of forgiveness, just an acknowledgement of wrong and the beginnings of accountability. I didn't respond immediately. Following my therapist's advice, I took time to process my feelings, to distinguish between my desire to repair our relationship and my need to protect myself from further hurt. After a week of reflection, I sent a brief email. Thomas, I received your letter. Thank you for your honesty. I would be open to talking when you're ready. Love, Mom. 2 days later, my phone rang. Thomas's name appeared on the screen. With a deep breath, I answered. Hello, Mom. His voice sounded smaller than I remembered, uncertain. It's me. Hello, Thomas. A pause. I wasn't sure you'd answer. I said I was open to talking. I know, but after everything, he trailed off. I wouldn't blame you if you never wanted to speak to me again. You're my son, I said simply. That hasn't changed even when you wished it had. I heard him inhale sharply. I deserve that. It's not about what you deserve, Thomas. It's about the truth. Something we've gotten away from these past few years. You're right, he acknowledged. Would it be possible to see you to talk in person? I considered his request. Where are you now? Minnesota, he said, surprising me. I'm staying with a friend in Minneapolis. About 30 minutes from you. The revelation that he was so close caused a flood of emotions, longing to see him, fear of another rejection, hope for reconciliation. Tomorrow, I decided. I have the morning off. There's a coffee shop called Riverdale Cafe near my apartment. 10 o'clock. I'll be there, Thomas promised. And Mom, thank you for this chance. As I hung up, I wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring. A true reconciliation. A deeper understanding, or simply the closure we both might need to move forward separately. What I did know was that, regardless of the outcome, I would face it as I had faced everything in my life, with honesty, dignity, and the strength that comes from knowing your own worth. The Riverdale Cafe was quiet when I arrived the next morning, just a few regulars nursing coffees and reading newspapers. I chose a table near the back, away from the windows, wanting privacy for what promised to be an emotional conversation. My hands trembled slightly as I arranged my purse on the chair beside me, checked my watch, straightened the sugar packets in their container. At 9:55, the door opened. Thomas stepped inside, scanning the room until his eyes found mine. He looked different somehow, thinner, with dark circles under his eyes, his usually immaculate appearance slightly rumpled. He wore jeans and a simple button-down shirt, not the designer clothes I'd glimpsed on Diana Hamilton's social media posts. As he approached my table, I noticed he was carrying a small package wrapped in brown paper. Mom, he said, his voice catching on the single syllable. I gestured to the chair across from me. Thomas. He sat down, placing the package carefully on the table between us. For a moment, we just looked at each other, taking in the changes that 6 months had wrought. You cut your hair, he observed. I touched the shorter style self-consciously. The salon at the community center offers discounted services for seniors. I thought it was time for a change. It looks nice, he said. It suits you. A waitress approached, temporarily breaking the tension. We both ordered coffee, mine black, his with cream and sugar, just as it had always been. When she left, the silence returned heavier now, with all the unspoken words between us. I'm not sure where to start, Thomas admitted finally. The beginning is usually a good place, I suggested. He nodded, taking a deep breath. I've been doing a lot of thinking since graduation. about the kind of person I've become, the kind of son I've been. His eyes, so like his father's, met mine directly. The truth is, I've been ashamed of myself for a long time, Mom. Not of you, of me. The waitress returned with our coffees. Thomas wrapped his hands around his mug as if drawing strength from its warmth. When I got to Princeton, he continued after she'd gone, I felt like I didn't belong. Everyone seemed so confident, so entitled to their place there. They had vacation stories from Europe and Asia, summer homes, trust funds, and what did I have? Stories about growing up above a laundromat. There's no shame in where we came from, Thomas, I said quietly. I know that now, or at least I'm learning it. He stared down at his coffee. But back then I was desperate to fit in. When Daniel Hamilton and I became friends and his parents took an interest in me, it felt like I'd found a shortcut to acceptance. If the Hamiltons, with all their wealth and connections, thought I was worthwhile, then maybe I really did belong at Princeton. And that became more important than honesty, than loyalty to your own mother. Thomas flinched, but didn't look away. Yes, I'm not proud of it, but yes. Each small lie, each omission about my background, each time I let someone assume the Hamiltons were my family, made the next one easier. Until eventually, I was living a completely fabricated life. And where did I fit in that fabricated life? You didn't, he admitted, his voice pained. That's why I kept you separate, why I avoided bringing you to campus, why I made excuses not to come home. I sipped my coffee, using the moment to gather my thoughts. Do you know what hurt the most, Thomas? Not that you were embarrassed by our modest circumstances. I could have understood that, even if it stung. It was that you were willing to erase years of sacrifice and love to maintain your fiction. I know, he whispered. When I saw your face that day at graduation, when I realized what I'd done, something broke inside me, Mom. The careful facade I'd built came crashing down. All I could see was the pain I'd caused the one person who had never given up on me. Tears welled in my eyes despite my determination to remain composed. I gave up everything for you, Thomas. Not because I had to, but because I believed in you, in your potential, in your dreams. And I repaid you by denying you were even my mother, Thomas said, his own eyes glistening. There's no excuse for that. None. He pushed the small package toward me. This isn't a peace offering. It's not meant to fix anything. But I wanted you to know that even in my worst moments of betrayal, there was a part of me that never forgot who I really was, who you are to me. Hesitantly, I unwrapped the brown paper. Inside was a small wooden box, weathered and familiar. I recognized it immediately, the jewelry box Thomas had made for me in 7th grade woodshop, the one I thought had been lost in our move to a smaller apartment years ago. You kept it, I whispered, running my fingers over the slightly uneven lid, the crooked heart carved into the front. Thomas nodded. It was in my dorm room at Princeton, on my desk. Even when I was pretending to be someone else, I kept this piece of my real life close by. I opened the box. Inside, nestled on a small cushion, was a silver locket. Not an expensive piece, but meaningful. It had belonged to my mother, one of the few keepsakes I'd managed to hold on to through years of financial struggles. I found it at a pawn shop in Minneapolis, Thomas explained. When things got really tight during my sophomore year of high school, you pawned it to pay for my advanced placement exam fees. I tracked it down last week. The locket blurred through my tears. I'd never told Thomas about pawning the necklace. I'd never told him about most of the sacrifices I'd made, believing that his focus should be on his studies, not on our financial hardships. How did you know? I saw the pawn ticket in your purse once, he admitted. I was looking for lunch money and found it instead. The description matched Grandma's locket, the one you used to wear every Sunday. After that, I noticed it was gone, but you never mentioned it, so neither did I. I always meant to get it back, I said softly. But there was always something more important needed for you: college application fees, proper clothes for interviews, textbooks. Thomas reached across the table, tentatively taking my hand. I understand now. All those years I thought you were just working hard. I didn't realize you were also giving up the few precious things you had, piece by piece. We sat in silence for a moment, the locket between us symbolizing both what had been lost and what might be reclaimed. What happens now? I finally asked. You mentioned deferring Harvard Medical School. Thomas nodded, withdrawing his hand. I need time to figure some things out. Who I really am, what kind of doctor I want to become, what values I want to live by. He hesitated. I've also cut ties with the Hamiltons. This surprised me. Completely? Yes. After graduation, Diana called me expecting me to apologize for the scene you caused. When I tried to explain that I was the one who needed to apologize for lying about you, she got angry. Said I was being ungrateful for everything they'd done for me. They did do a lot for you, Thomas. Yes and no, he countered. They gave me material advantages, connections, opportunities. But they also encouraged me to be ashamed of my background, to cut myself off from you. Diana once told me that successful people understand when to shed their past, as if you were something to be discarded once I'd outgrown you. I hadn't known this, hadn't realized the subtle poison that had been whispered in my son's ear. Not that it excused his choices, but it helped explain them. What will you do for the next 6 months? I asked. I've taken a position at a community health clinic in North Minneapolis, Thomas said. The pay is minimal, but the experience is valuable. They serve a lot of uninsured patients, people who remind me of where I came from. And after that, Harvard in January, he confirmed, but with a different perspective. I don't want to be the kind of doctor who only serves the wealthy and connected. I want to use my education to help people who really need it, regardless of their ability to pay. I smiled, recognizing in his words the idealistic boy who once declared he wanted to be a doctor to help people who are sick. That sounds like the Thomas I raised, I said softly. A look of pain crossed his face. I don't know if I can ever make up for what I did, Mom, for how I hurt you. Probably not, I agreed honestly. Some wounds leave scars even after they heal. But that doesn't mean we can't build something new, something truer. I'd like that, Thomas said, hope flickering in his eyes. If you're willing to try. I reached out and took his hand again, feeling the warmth of connection that had been absent for too long. I'm your mother, Thomas. That hasn't changed and never will, regardless of what you call me or who you introduce me as, but moving forward requires honesty on both sides. No more hiding parts of yourself because you think they're not good enough. I promise, he said solemnly. No more lies, no more pretending. As we continued talking, the walls that had grown between us began to crumble. Not completely. Trust, once broken, takes time to rebuild, but enough to let light shine through the cracks. Thomas told me about his experiences at Princeton, both good and bad, without the sanitized version he'd previously shared. I told him about my support group, my new interests, the life I was building that didn't revolve solely around his needs and dreams. We agreed to meet weekly during his time in Minneapolis. Small steps toward reconciliation, toward the mother-son relationship we both wanted to reclaim. When we finally parted outside the cafe, Thomas hesitated, then embraced me in a hug that felt both familiar and new. I love you, Mom, he whispered. I'm sorry it took losing you to realize how much. You never lost me, I replied, holding him close. You just forgot where to look. As I watched him walk away, the silver locket warm in my hand, I felt something shift within me, a weight, lifting a wound beginning to heal. The road ahead would not be easy, but for the first time in years, I believed we were both traveling in the right direction. Over the next 6 months, Thomas and I rebuilt our relationship one conversation at a time. Our weekly coffee meetings expanded to include occasional dinners at my apartment where I taught him to make the simple, nourishing meals of his childhood. Once, he even invited me to observe at the community health clinic where he was working proudly, introducing me to his colleagues as my mom, the strongest person I know. Each step forward wasn't without its challenges. There were moments when old patterns threatened to re-emerge, times when Thomas seemed uncomfortable introducing me to certain people, or when I caught myself holding back parts of my life out of habit. But we had both committed to honesty, and slowly a new foundation formed between us. The support group for parents of first-generation college students became an unexpected source of strength for me. Sharing my story helped other parents navigate their own complex emotions as their children moved between different worlds. Some evenings, I would return home from these meetings feeling lighter, more confident in my value beyond just being Thomas's mother. My therapist, Dr. Brennan, continued to guide me through the process of reclaiming my identity. You're experiencing what we call post-traumatic growth, she explained during one session. You've taken a profound hurt and used it as an opportunity for transformation. I considered her words. I never would have chosen this path. The pain of Thomas's rejection, the public humiliation. Of course not, she agreed. But sometimes our deepest wounds become doorways to parts of ourselves we never knew existed. You're discovering who Nadine is beyond her role as a mother. That's powerful. She was right. For the first time in decades, I was exploring interests and forming connections that had nothing to do with Thomas. I joined a book club at the library. I volunteered teaching basic computer skills to other seniors. I even went on a dinner date with Harold, a kind widower I met through my church's community outreach program. When I mentioned the date to Thomas during one of our coffee meetings, a look of surprise crossed his face. "You're dating?" he asked. "Just dinner," I clarified, feeling strangely nervous about his reaction. "Harold is nice company. We both enjoy gardening and classic films." Thomas was quiet for a moment, stirring his coffee longer than necessary. "That's good, Mom. You deserve happiness, a life beyond just working and waiting for me to call." The acknowledgement, simple as it was, felt significant. Thomas was seeing me as a complete person with my own needs and desires, not just as his support system. In December, a week before Thomas was due to leave for Harvard, we met at the Riverdale Cafe one last time. Snow fell gently outside the windows, transforming the street into a winter wonderland. "I have something for you," Thomas said after we'd ordered. He reached into his messenger bag and pulled out an envelope. "What's this?" I asked, accepting it curiously. "Open it." Inside was a formal-looking document. As I scanned the contents, my eyes widened. "Thomas, this is the deed to a small condo near the community center," he confirmed. "It's yours, Mom, fully paid for." I stared at him in shock. "How is this possible? You're a student with medical school debt ahead of you." Thomas looked down, a hint of shame crossing his face. "The Hamiltons gave me a substantial graduation gift, money that was supposed to be my starting capital for life after Harvard." He met my eyes. "I've been keeping it in a separate account, unable to spend it knowing what it represented. Then I realized there was one perfect use for it." "Thomas, I can't accept this. It's too much." "It's not enough," he countered. "Not compared to what you've given up for me, but it's a start. You shouldn't have to work 3 jobs at 65, Mom. You deserve security peace, a place that's truly yours." Tears welled in my eyes. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll accept it. Please, let me do this one thing for you." The condo wasn't large or luxurious, but it represented something I'd never dared to imagine: financial security in my later years. No more second mortgage. No more night shifts, cleaning offices. No more constant worry about making ends meet. "On one condition," I finally said, "that you understand this doesn't erase the past or instantly fix everything between us. Real healing takes time and consistent effort from both of us." "I know," Thomas nodded solemnly. "This isn't about buying forgiveness. It's about trying to right one small piece of the wrong I've done. About ensuring you have stability after sacrificing yours for me all these years." I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "Then I accept, with gratitude and love." The morning Thomas left for Harvard, I drove him to the airport. As we stood at the security checkpoint, that awkward moment of airport goodbyes upon us, he surprised me by pulling me into a tight embrace. "I'm not ashamed anymore, Mom," he whispered. "Not of where I came from, not of who you are. I'm proud to be your son." I held him close, memorizing the feel of him in my arms, my grown son who had traveled so far from me only to find his way back. "You're going to be a wonderful doctor, Thomas. Not because of Princeton or Harvard or the Hamiltons, but because of your heart. Don't lose sight of that again." "I won't," he promised. "And I'll be home for spring break to help you move into the condo." After he disappeared through security, I didn't immediately leave. I stood watching the departures board, reflecting on the journey that had brought us to this moment. 6 months ago, I had stood up at his graduation, refusing to be erased from his story. Today, I was sending him off with a renewed understanding between us, not perfect, still healing, but authentic in a way our relationship hadn't been for years. In the months that followed, my life transformed in ways both subtle and profound. Moving into the condo gave me physical security I'd never known. Reducing my work to just part-time at the diner allowed my body to recover from decades of overexertion. The extra time and energy let me expand my volunteer work and personal interests. Thomas kept his promise to come home for spring break, helping me paint and furnish the new condo. He called regularly from Harvard, sharing not just his successes, but also his struggles, his doubts, his process of becoming the doctor and the person he wanted to be. During one call, he mentioned something that caught me by surprise. "I've been talking about you in my medical ethics class," he said. "Oh, in what context?" "We were discussing privilege in healthcare access. I shared our story how a patient's background might be more complex than it appears, how assumptions about family support can miss important realities." He paused. "I told them about a mother who worked 3 jobs for 20 years to put her son through school, only to have that son deny her at his graduation." My breath caught. "You told them that?" "Yes," Thomas said simply. "It was hard. Some of my classmates looked at me differently afterward, but it was the truth. And living truthfully is part of being the person I want to become." That night, lying in bed in my new condo, I reflected on the lessons of the past year. The pain of Thomas's public rejection at graduation had been excruciating, a wound that cut to the core of my identity as a mother. But from that wound had grown unexpected strengths, self-advocacy, community, a renewed sense of personal worth. I had learned that love doesn't require erasure of self. That sacrifice shouldn't mean becoming invisible. That standing up for your own dignity isn't selfishness, but self-preservation. Most importantly, I had discovered that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is refuse to disappear to stand firm in your truth, even when those you love most wish you would fade into the background. My son was finding his way back to his authentic self beyond the facades and false narratives he'd constructed, and I was finding my way forward as a whole person, not defined solely by motherhood or sacrifice, but by my own inherent worth. The journey wasn't over. Trust takes time to rebuild patterns, take practice to change. There would be missteps and old wounds reopened along the way. But we were both committed to the path of truth, however challenging it might be. And that, I realized, was the real victory. Not that Thomas had apologized or made amends, though those things mattered. The victory was that we had both reclaimed our authentic voices and were learning to speak our truths with love and dignity. The small silver locket, now restored to its place around my neck, caught the moonlight streaming through my window, a tangible reminder of what had been lost and found again. Not just a piece of jewelry, but the acknowledgement of a lifetime of love and sacrifice. In the quiet of my new home, I finally felt at peace. Not because everything was perfect or because all wounds were healed, but because I had stood up for myself when it mattered most. I had refused to be silent, refused to be erased. And in doing so, I had not only reclaimed my place in my son's narrative, but discovered the power of my own. So, what advice would I give to others facing similar situations? Speak your truth. Stand in your worth. Love fiercely, but never at the cost of your dignity. And remember that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do when someone tries to make you invisible is to simply refuse to disappear. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself against someone you love? Let me know in the comments below. And if this story touched something in you, please subscribe and share it with others who might need to hear that they too deserve to be seen and acknowledged. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, your story matters, your sacrifices matter, and most importantly, you matter, just as you are.